Stanley's father was also named Stanley Yelnats. Stanley's father's full name was Stanley Yelnats III. Our Stanley is Stanley Yelnats IV. Everyone in his family had always liked the fact that Stanley Yelnats was spelled the same frontward and backward, so they kept naming their son Stanley. Stanley was an only child, as was every other Stanley Yelnats before him. All of them had something else in common. Despite their awful luck, they always remained hopeful. As Stanley's father liked to say, I learned from failure. But perhaps that was part of the curse as well. If Stanley and his father weren't very hopeful, then it wouldn't hurt so much every time their hopes were crushed. Not every Stanley Yelnats had been failure. Stanley's mother often pointed out whenever Stanley or his father became so discouraged that they actually started to believe in the curse. The first Stanley Yelnats, Stanley's great-grandfather, had made a fortune in the stock market. He couldn't have been too unlucky. At such times, she neglected to mention the bad luck that befell the first Stanley Yelnats. He lost his entire fortune when he was moving from New York to California. His stagecoach was robbed by outlaw Kissing Katie Barlow. If it wasn't for that, Stanley's family would now be living in a mansion on a beach in California. Instead, they were crammed in a tiny little house that smelled of burning rubber and food odor. If only, the apartment smelled the way it did because Stanley's father was trying to invent a way to recycle old sneakers. The first person who finds use for old sneakers, he said, will be a very rich man. It was the latest project that led to Stanley's arrest. The bus ride became increasingly bumpy because the road was no longer paved. Actually, Stanley had been impressed when he first found out that his great-grandfather was robbed by Kissing Katie Barlow. True, he would have preferred living on a beach in California, but it was still kind of cool to have someone in your family robbed by a famous outlaw. Kate Barlow didn't actually kiss Stanley's great-grandfather. That wouldn't have really cool, but she only kissed the man she killed. Instead, she robbed him and left him stranded in the middle of the desert. He was lucky to have survived, Stanley's mother was quick to point out. The bus was slowing down. The guard grunted as he stretched his arms. Welcome to Camp Green Lake, said the driver. Stanley looked out the dirty window. He couldn't see any lake, and hardly anything was green. Stanley felt somewhat dazed as the guard unlocked his handcuff and led him off the bus. He'd been on the bus for over 8 hours. Be careful, the bus driver said as Stanley walked down the steps. Stanley wasn't sure if the bus driver meant for him to be careful going down the steps or if he was telling him to be careful at Camp Green Lake. Thanks for the ride, he said. His mouth was very dry and his throat hurt. He stepped on the hard, dry earth. There was a band of sweat around the wrist where the handcuff had been. The land was barren and desolate. He could see a few run-down buildings and some tents. Farther away, there was a cabin beneath two tall trees. Those 2 tall trees were the only plant life he could see. There weren't even weeds. The guard led Stanley to a small building.